Greetings all, hope this finds you well as always. It's now time for the latest update from the machine shop, where we're up to and what we're on with. We've started off with the store because we've actually had a rather lovely donation that I want to show off to you. This has come from Craig, who's one of my regular volunteers. He runs a company, or is currently in the process of closing down, a company that specialised in industrial precision measurement and calibration of measuring equipment, and he's very kindly donated to us this lovely, absolutely gorgeous, the absolutely lovely pair of sign centres. The idea with these here is you have a piece of kit, let's say for sake of argument it's a tap, and you want to find out what taper that tap is cut to. Well, if you set it between those two centres there, these centres are mounted onto this chunk of steel here, which is hinged at this end, and then at the other end has a little roller here. Now, for those of the non-engineering benters wondering what the critical point of that is, that means that that can be used as a sign bar. Now, a sign bar is a way of very accurately measuring angles by effectively creating a right angle triangle. What you know is the difference between those two rollers, from the centres of those two rollers, okay? So that's the hypotenuse of your right angle triangle. This, as I said, it hinges on this roller here, and then on this roller, if you lift it up, you can put a series of what we call slip gauges. They were developed by Mr. Johansson, who was a Swedish engineer, and were actually strangely taken over by Ford Motor Company. But they're basically pieces of ground-hardened steel which are ground to very accurate tolerances of known thickness. So by putting your shim gauges under there, you can lift this by a known amount. That in turn, of course, gives you the length of the second side of your triangle. So if you lift this up at this end, eventually you will get to the stage where whatever the taper is on this, that taper, when measured from the surface plate, whatever it is this whole shebang's sitting on, will be level. At that point, you can then, very simply, you know how much you've raised it, you know the length of the hypotenuse, so from there you have two sides of your right angle triangle, so you can very simply, by trigonometry, calculate the angle that this plate's sitting at. And so from there, you can work out your thing. So they're very useful. We never actually had a set to play with before, but for certainly measuring and setting up, they're very useful and they're absolutely lovely. Of course, there's something about metrology gear for me. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it. It's lovely just to look at, and sort of Coventry Gauge Company, lovely manufacturer. And anyway, Craig donated that along with a few other bits and pieces, a large quantity of rags and 2 printers. So very much appreciated, Craig. Thank you very much indeed. And I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to the day when he finally does close his company back down and can come and start machining stuff for me again. It's quite understandable that the man's busy. He's got other things on his mind at the moment, but that's a lovely piece of kit. That absolutely lovely. So anyway, this bit here is just our main store. It's where we keep all the sort of consumable tooling, a lot of the spare measuring gear and measuring gear that's currently in use. It was created a long time ago from a spare space that was never really used. And some of you may have seen that door in the back of some of my other videos. Fort Pardy, incidentally, is a tribute to the guy who used to run the workshop before I took it over, a guy called Keith. And, well, I'm sure you can work the rest of that out. So anyway, so that's that. Right, so in other news, what else do we have? Well, the first things we have are some bits off the steam crane. What we have here are the big and little ends. There's one of the big ends. It's a split brass, and that thing it's sat in is half the shell that retains the 2 split brasses. And then we also have the 2 little ends here. Now, these are currently, again, are split brass. They locate into the crosshead on the 2 engines that the crane has, because, of course, it has one on the left, one on the right. And these have been set up so I can measure with the feeler gauge for wear. In actual fact, they aren't as badly worn as I thought they were, so we're currently debating what we're going to do to recondition them. My idea is simply skim a bit off the lower half of the brass on this face here, and then remachine them back to round, and that should hopefully take the slight wear out. The other thing that's done is these are grease lubricated. In the end of the pin here, there's a grease nipple. Those grease nipples have been renewed, and then we've also pumped grease through them to flush all the crap of ages out of all the lubrication ways in the pins. So they're done, And they, as I said, they're under assessment, and that's awaiting machining. That, of course, has a twin, and its twin is currently set up in the Mostana up here for machining. Now, it's a bit Heath Robinson, this, but it actually works very well indeed. What we've got is, we've got the two halves of the shell there, which I've sat into the cap to locate them laterally, okay? They have a slight gap in them here to allow take-up for wear when fitted. So I've opened that gap back up using a little bit of shim, and then we've got a V-block here, which in turn is held into the cap with 2 lengths of studding to hold it all together so we can machine it. And then I've just set the whole shebang up in the 4-jaw chuck on the Mostana. To be honest, the reason I've used the Mostana is partially idleness, partially practicality. It's a machine that isn't frantically in use every day, so it can have that setup in it for a couple of days and no problems at all. It also, at the time, we had a lot of 3-jaw work lined up for the Harrison, and I don't like changing chucks any more than absolutely necessary. The Mostana normally runs the 4-jaw chuck on it, so it was just as easy as to walk over here and set it up in there. So that's just awaiting final machining, and then the first set are done. I can then chuck the second set in, and we're away and sorted. The other thing to point the camera at is an empty floor. Yes, an empty floor. The bits of Repton are done. They have gone. They have departed. The rectification of Repton's bottom end is, from the machine shop perspective, now finished. There's still stuff to refit. There's a lot of taper pins and whatnot to sort out, but all the machine work that we need to do is now finished. There's a minor fly in the ointment in the form of a Super Treader, which needs some further repair. We're currently working out what we're going to do there, but from the immediate bottom end motion work, it's finished, it's done. So that job's finally reached a conclusion. And the other thing we've got is what we saw last week, which is Atos 6's header. Looks slightly different, mainly because it's been flipped through 90 degrees. Now, what I showed you last week, I was in the process of setting up to cut the steam pipe flanges, and they have both been done now. You can see how the chamfer in the flange there, and also in the flange over the other side, they've both been set up and both remachined using the tooling I showed last week. And so that bit of the job's done. This afternoon, I've then very carefully, because it's a very heavy and very awkward thing, this header, to manoeuvre, I've very carefully lifted it off the machine with a crane, tipped it through 90 degrees, and then set it back down. Now, this is where some previous work will actually help us out. The first job I did on the header was machined that steam pipe flange there. That's this chunk that's bolted down to the table of the machine. That was machined flat and square for the rest of the header. So that was done deliberately because I knew this stage was coming, that where I would end up wanting to use that as a datum surface. So you can see how I've actually cheated, and it's bolted down to the table with bolts through 2 of the stud holes. There's a third clamp around the back, because rather irritatingly, they didn't drill the stud holes at quite the T-slot spacing of the table, but hey-ho, such is life. The next job that's going to happen is on this face here, you'll see all these holes. Now, these are the sockets into which the superator elements locate. There's quite a convoluted casting internally, this header. There's a series, basically where the studs are, if you look at that face, where there's those vertical rows of studs, there's an internal divider in the header, okay? So what you have is you will have, let me get this right, you will have steam supply, so you'll have a steam going out through the steam pipes to the cylinder and steam being supplied from the boiler. So the idea is steam comes out of there, through a superheater element, back into there, off to the cylinders to do its work, okay? Right, now what needs doing here is each of these sockets has a rather ratty chamfer in it, and that chamfer needs cleaning up, in some cases putting back to round, in some cases putting back to the correct angle, and to do that we're going to use this rather large countersink cutter, which is currently set up in the spindle along the tool hole that we saw a couple of weeks back. However, you'll notice there's also a load of other stuff on there, and that's my infamous indicator on a stick setup, because the first thing I've had to do is set this square and true to the machine. Now, the way I've done that is I've put this, which is a straight edge. That is a piece of steel that's hardened and ground. It's parallel and straight. I've put that in, sat it on the studs, and I've butted it up against the face of the header. I've then just put 2 G-clamps on there just to hold it so it's falling off and moving around. And then I've got my setup, my indicator on a stick setup, as I refer to it, which is, as you can see, is clamped to the cutter shank, so it can't move. The cutter, of course, I shouldn't have to say this, but the cutter, of course, isn't revolving while all this is going on. And then that indicator is then running on the straight edge. So by traversing the table laterally, I can then move the indicator along that straight edge, and by basically moving it from one end of its travel to the other, and then by adjusting the header on the table, by twisting it, I can then set it so it's absolutely parallel to the table. And I spent the afternoon doing that. It's then been clamped down, and so tomorrow we'll get rid of that straight edge, get rid of the indicator, and then I can start aligning that cutter to the first hole, and then hopefully the spacing of these holes should be pretty even, so it should be possible to sort of cut one up an inch. Well, I think it's about 2 inch space. I don't know what it is actually. It's either 2 or 3 inches spacing, up whatever the spacing is, cut 2, across, down, rinse, repeat, until eventually you finally reach the last hole. So that job will be done. Incidentally, before the health and safety police jump onto the bandwagon and start jumping up and down and demanding that I be tarred and feathered for running a machine without any guards on it, I would point out I've had to take taking the guards off the table has actually been forced on me. It's physically impossible to actually get that header on with the guards on. So we're just going to have to be, well, we're being very sensible. The machine has all the safeties beside the guards. It also has this, which you may have heard clicking away in the background while I was working. This is a probe, and if that probe was moved, you'll hear that click, and that click would promptly kill the motor of the machine. So if anyone's foolish enough to step into this area while it's running, the probe will stop the machine. It's a simple safety. So anyway, folks, that's that job all set up and ready to go. And I think, to be honest, that's about it for the moment. As I said, I've got Brian in tomorrow. He's finishing off those Domid bolts for 806. Craig's currently, apart from donating lovely things to us, currently in the process of moving house and closing down a business. And Barry's finished off Repton this week. So anyway, folks, I hope you found it educational, informative as always. Take care, and I'll see you around.